Nation against the bourgeoisie does not become the supreme passion of the working man, the inevitable consequence is drunkenness and all that is generally called demoralization. The physical enervation and the sickness, universal in consequence of the factory system, were enough to induce Commissioner Hawkins to attribute this demoralization thereto as inevitable. How much more, when mental lassitude is added to them, and when the influences already mentioned which tempt every working man to demoralization, make themselves felt here too. There is no cause for surprise, therefore, that in the manufacturing towns especially, drunkenness and sexual excesses have reached the pitch which I have already described 178. Further, the slavery in which the bourgeoisie holds the proletariat chained, is nowhere more conspicuous than in the factory system. Here ends all freedom and law, and in fact, the operative must be in the mill at 5:30 in the morning. If he comes a couple of minutes too late, he is fined. If he comes 10 minutes too late, he is not let in until breakfast is over, and a quarter of the day's wages is withheld, though he loses only 2½ hours work out of 12. He must eat, drink, and sleep at command. For satisfying the most imperative needs, he is vouchsafed the least possible time absolutely required by them. Whether his dwelling is a half hour or a whole one removed from the factory does not concern his employer. The despotic bell calls him from his bed, his breakfast, his dinner. What a time he has of it too, inside the factory. Here the employer is absolute lawgiver. He makes regulations at will, changes and adds to his codex at pleasure, and even, if he inserts the craziest stuff, the courts say to the working man, you were your own master. No one forced you to agree to such a contract, if you did not wish to, but now, when you have freely entered into it, you must be bound by it. And so the working man only gets into the bargain the mockery of the justice of the peace, who is a bourgeois himself, and of the law which is made by the bourgeoisie. Such decisions have been given often enough. In October 1844, the operatives of Kennedy's mill, in Manchester, struck. Kennedy prosecuted them on the strength of a regulation placarded in the mill, that at no time more than 2 operatives in one room may quit work at once. And the court decided in his favor, giving the working men the explanation cited above 179A, and such rules as these usually are. For instance, 1. The doors are closed 10 minutes after work begins, and thereafter no one is admitted until the breakfast hour. Whoever is absent during this time forfeits 3rd per loom. 2. Every power loom weaver detected absenting himself at another time, while the machinery is in motion, forfeits for each hour and each loom. 3rd. Every person who leaves the room during working hours, without obtaining permission from the overlooker, forfeits 3rd. 3. Weavers who fail to supply themselves with scissors forfeit, per day, 1d4. All broken shuttles, brushes, oil cans, wheels, window panes, etc., must be paid for by the weaver. 5. No weaver to stop work without giving a week's notice. The manufacturer may dismiss any employee without notice for bad work or improper behavior. 6. Every operative detected speaking to another, singing or whistling, will be fined 6d, for leaving his place during working hours. 6d 179b. Another copy of factory regulations lies before me, according to which every operative who comes 3 minutes too late, forfeits the wages for a quarter of an hour, and every one who comes 20 minutes too late, for a quarter of a day. Every one who remains absent until breakfast forfeits a shilling on Monday, and 6pence every other day of the week, etc., etc. This last is the regulation of the Phoenix Works in Jersey Street, Manchester. It may be said that such rules are necessary in a great, complicated factory, in order to ensure the harmonious working of the different parts. It may be asserted that such a severe discipline is as necessary here as in an army. This may be so, but what sort of a social order is it which cannot be maintained without such shameful tyranny? Either the end sanctifies the means, or the inference of the badness of the end from the badness of the means is justified. Every one who has served as a soldier knows what it is to be subjected even for a short time to military discipline. But these operatives are condemned from their ninth year to their death, to live under the sword, physically and mentally. They are worse slaves than the Negroes in America, for they are more sharply watched, and yet it is demanded of them that they shall live like human beings, shall think and feel like men. Verily, this they can do only under glowing hatred towards their oppressors, and towards that order of things which place them in such a position, which degrades them to machines. But it is far more shameful yet, that according to the universal testimony of the operatives, numbers of manufacturers collect the fines imposed upon the operatives with the most heartless severity, and for the purpose of piling up extra profits out of the farthings thus extorted from the impoverished proletarians. Leach asserts too, that the operatives often find the factory clock moved forward a quarter of an hour and the doors shut, while the clerk moves about with the fines book inside, noting the many names of the absentees. Leach claims to have counted 95 operatives thus shut out, standing before a factory, whose clock was a quarter of an hour slower than the town clocks at night, and a quarter of an hour faster in the morning. The factory report relates similar facts. In one factory the clock was set back during working hours, so that the operatives worked overtime without extra pay. In another, a whole quarter of an hour overtime was worked. In a third, there were two clocks, an ordinary one and a machine clock, which registered the revolutions of the main shaft. If the machinery went slowly, working hours were measured by the machine clock until the number of revolutions due in 12 hours was reached. If work went well, so that the number was reached before the usual working hours were ended, the operatives were forced to toil on to the end of the 12th hour. The witness adds, that he had known girls who had good work, and who had worked overtime, who, nevertheless, betook themselves to a life of prostitution, rather than submit to this tyranny. 181a. To return to the fines, Leach relates having repeatedly seen women in the last period of pregnancy fined 6d for the offence of sitting down a moment to rest. Fines for bad work are wholly arbitrary. The goods are examined in the wareroom, and the supervisor charges the fines upon a list without even summoning the operative, who only learns that he has been fined when the overlooker pays his wages, and the goods have perhaps been sold, or certainly been placed beyond his reach. Leach has in his possession such a fines list, 10 feet long, and amounting to £35 17s. He relates that in the factory, where this list was made, a new supervisor was dismissed for fining too little, and so bringing in £5 too little weekly. 181b. And I repeat, that I know Leach to be a thoroughly trustworthy man incapable of a falsehood. But the operative is his employer's slave in still other respects. If his wife or daughter finds favour in the eyes of the master, a command, a hint suffices, and she must place herself at his disposal. When the employer wishes to supply with signatures a petition in favour of bourgeois interests, he need only send it to his mill. If he wishes to decide a parliamentary election, he sends his enfranchised operatives in rank and file to the polls, and they vote for the bourgeois candidate, whether they will or no. If he desires a majority in a public meeting, he dismisses them half an hour earlier than usual, and secures them places close to the platform, where he can watch them to his satisfaction. Two further arrangements contribute, especially to force the operative under the dominion of the manufacturer: the truck system and the cottage system. The truck system, the payment of the operatives in goods, was formerly universal in England. The manufacturer opens a shop, for the convenience of the operatives, and to protect them from the high prices of the petty dealers. Here goods of all sorts are sold to them on credit, and to keep the operatives from going to the shops, where they could get their goods more cheaply, the tommy shops usually charging 25 to 30% more than others, wages are paid in requisitions on the shop instead of money. The general indignation against this infamous system led to the passage of the Truck Act in 1831, by which, for most employees, payment in truck orders was declared void and illegal, and was made punishable by fine. But, like most other English laws, this has been enforced only here and there. In the towns it is carried out comparatively efficiently, but in the country, the truck system, disguised or undisguised, flourishes. In the town of Leicester too, it is very common. There lie before me nearly a dozen convictions for this offence, dating from the period between November, 1843, and June, 1844, and reported, in part, in the Manchester Guardian, and, in part, in the Northern Star. The system is, of course, less openly carried on at present. Wages are usually paid in cash, but the employer still has means enough at command to force him to purchase his wares in the truck shop and nowhere else. Hence it is difficult to combat the truck system, because it can now be carried on under cover of the law, provided only that the operative receives his wages in money. The Northern Star of April 27, 1843, publishes a letter from an operative of Harmfirth, near Huddersfield, in Yorkshire, which refers to a manufacturer of the name of Bowers, as follows, retranslated from the German. It is very strange to think that the accursed truck system should exist to such an extent as it does in Harmfirth, and nobody be found